luxury SUVs, electric generators, and in the distance, a fleet of custom 737s that had delivered the falconers from Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries. Outside each tent were several tall perches for hooded birds. Although Osama bin Laden wasn't a falconer himself, he had business with the members of the Saudi royal family who were camped there. "Maybe you imported a little of Wyoming?" she said. "No one ever claimed dreams had to make perfect sense." "This one sure as hell didn't," Nate said, swinging his feet out from beneath the covers. The floor was cold. "And if Joe was there, it couldn't have been Afghanistan. Joe never goes anywhere as far as I know." It was true. Nate's friend Joe was a Wyoming game warden. He rarely took time off, and when he did, it was to go fishing, camping, or hunting. In Wyoming. Joe had once told Nate he felt no need to visit anywhere else until he knew every square inch of the state. Since Wyoming was nearly 100,000 square miles, the statement was akin to Joe admitting he would never travel anywhere ever. Nate stood and stretched. He still felt lingering pain from his wounds, especially in the morning. Nate was tall and broad-shouldered, and his flesh was marked by 24 comma-shaped scars on the front of his thighs, as well as across his abdomen, chest, and neck. That's where the doctors had dug out the double-aught buckshot pellets that were slightly larger than the size of a .22 round. The previous spring, he'd been hit in an ambush by 2 men with shotguns. Nate was unarmed at the time. While he'd been in critical condition in a hospital in Billings after the assault, Liv had been imprisoned in an underground root cellar on a compound owned by a family of savages. Rest, exercise, stretching, and reclaiming his life as a falconer had led to his recovery. Liv had recovered as well, although her injuries had been psychological. She'd healed, but not to the point where she could sleep yet without a light on. After they'd reunited, he and Liv had gone off the grid and had stayed in a remote cabin they'd been offered by a friendly rancher in southern Wyoming. His peregrine and red-tailed hawk, released from his van by the family of white trash miscreants named Kates, had both somehow located him and returned. It was a small miracle, and the reunification had astounded Liz Brannon. Nate, who had become accustomed to small miracles he couldn't explain, had simply shrugged. "There were so many strange things in that dream," he said to Liv. "I've never flown a gerfalcon, for one thing. I don't know where I got it. And I was wearing 2 guns strapped across my chest like some kind of Western outlaw. I've never packed 2 guns. "Maybe you should put some clothes on," she said. Nate slept naked, and he didn't mind walking around the cabin unclothed. Sometimes he perched on the branch of a cottonwood tree overlooking the encampment river and simply watched it flow by for hours with his legs dangling. Occasionally a raft filled with fly fishermen would float by underneath him. They never looked up. He retrieved a light blanket from the bed and draped it over his shoulders. "I wish I could shake that dream," he mumbled. "Have some coffee. I made a pot while you were threatening bad guys." "I'd rather have you." "Nate, we don't have the time." She said it with less finality than he'd expected. In the small kitchen, Nate poured coffee into a mug and took it to the front window and parted the curtains. It wasn't quite daylight. A carpet of light fog haunted the late fall grass, and it hung low in the trees. A mule deer, fawn, and doe picked their way through the close-packed trees to the river. It was October, 7 months after he'd been attacked and nearly killed, and it was his favorite month of the year.